You see, the journey in Christ is first of all about relationship. And secondly, it's in the context of unconditional love. Love for our Father, love for the spiritual community that calls Him Father, that we're a part of in Christ, and then love for our neighbor. So when we talk about who we want to be at the journey, we picture that community. So when we moved into the city, we had grown pretty quickly in at Veterans Inc. to about 140 people, 150 people pretty quickly in the early months. But when we moved across the river just a mile west, we lost half of those folk. So when we began at the Tech that first week, we were around 70 folk. By that Christmas, we had grown to over 100, and then over those years, the momentum began to build, and by the time we were finished at the Tech, we were around 240, 250 people on a regular Sunday.
Liz and I and Dave moved to Worcester in 2011, in the summer. Liz and I got here first, and we'd been checking out other churches for about a month, and then Dave said, "Hey, I heard about this new church plant called The Journey, and I'm going to go there Sunday if you want to come." And so we came. It was the last place we all visited, I think, right?
Yeah.
It was instant connection.
We had been looking around for a church, and just randomly, when we were up going to Green Hill Park, we happened to see a sign for The Journey, and checked it out online and thought, well, let's go give it a look.
Malia and I met in high school, and when we first heard about The Journey, we were dating and had been dating for about a year. And we were 18 years old, and we were just out of high school.
And it was then that I kind of had this bubbling up in me, this welling up where I just wanted to go to church. It had been forever since I had gone to church, you know, since I was a little girl. And I was like, I really want to go to church. Can we go to church? And he's like, yeah, you know, I think my parents are on this launch team for some sort of a new thing, a new church. Like, let's check in with them. And so when he checked in with them, they invited us to the first ever launch service at The Journey.
The connections to the people was really, really important. And also just seeing all the things that The Journey valued, everything from simple church and just the way they decided, let's do these few things well, right? And like commit to worship on Sunday, right? Serving the Worcester city and life groups, and the priorities that they built on, I thought were perfect.
I think like a lot of people found The Journey online initially, and I think was just really attracted to the vision and the mission that I saw online, and the intergenerational nature of the church, and just the absolute welcome that I received.
In the early 5 years of the church, well over half the attendance was below 34 years of age, between 18 and 34, and that just stunned a lot of Christian leaders. When we were asked, how did you achieve that? And I started thinking about it, the distinction I think is that we never treat young adults as a ministry group or a target group. We treat young adults as adults. The church is theirs. So from the very beginning, young adults have served and led side by side with we older leaders.
The church really, not only did they enfold us as family and community like we had never experienced before, but they also called us to another level of service to the church. We've never been allowed to stay where we're at, which is amazing. And here we are 10 years later, all those people are now in their 30s, and they are all raising up people, young people underneath them. We have people on the worship team and on the media team and in every other ministry area of the church that are in their early 20s that are now taking ownership of their roles. And so I think that those early years set a really important precedent for the church and the culture that is The Journey that will live on now, I think, bringing it to a place to where you can then pass it on to the next person.
I feel like the Worcester Technical School, like the time that we spent there, was a time where the foundations for the culture of the church were being laid, and the relationships between the members were being formed and built, especially as a very young and new church. I think that needed to happen.
What I loved about the leadership, and Tom especially at that time, is the real hands and feet approach to the gospel, the purity of it, not buying into some growth plan, that if we loved people, we showed grace, we had purpose, we brought meaning into people's lives because of Jesus, not because we had this great plan or we were wearing motivational t-shirts or anything like that. It was really pure gospel.
Even early on, I was already, I think, sensing the call to this church. Tom and Vit in particular, I think, were kindred spirits because we came here with a missional heart. You know, we left a life behind in Boston because we felt God called us to this city, and I think they'd felt like, you know, similar. They were taking risks because God called them to this city, and it began a kind of irreversible movement in my life towards focusing on, in Worcester, focusing on the journey, just seeing my sense of calling in a whole new way.
We've learned so much about what it means to be the hands and feet of Jesus in a city, what it means to actually intentionally love your community. I had never been a part of a community that was so focused on loving its city and its community and doing it in very intentional, relational ways.
I think one thing that I've always appreciated about the journey is the way that we continue to think towards the future. The way that we are always looking for like what God could be doing next is very important and key part of the journey story.
So if you listen to the earliest vision of the church, it was always that we would have locations in strategic neighborhoods around the city where we are becoming part of that neighborhood, not just bringing good into it, but being a part of that neighborhood where we have roots. Now, early on, that was a challenge because when you're renting space in a high school, the city tends to keep you at arm's distance because there's no proof you're going to stick around, so to speak. So we announced to our leadership community that we were beginning to pray that God would open up some significant space for our offices, for us to serve the city better, and to begin to really set our roots down. And it was in that season that another church congregation was also in transition. And God began a conversation between us and that church that led to one of the more exciting chapters in our 10-year history.